We're counting down the top 10 most extreme swarms in the animal kingdom and comparing them to a human cast of thousands. Discover that size really does matter when swarming's taken to the most extreme.
Earth is a planet of extremes. Extreme places. And extreme animals. Join us as we count down to find the most unusual and the most extraordinary on Animal Planet's The Most Extreme. Number 10.
Our first contender in the countdown of extreme swarms can be found a little close to home. Just one mouse in the house can cause all kinds of trouble. In the wild, mice can also cause trouble. That's because it doesn't take long for one mouse to become a swarm. The mouse is number 10 in the countdown because it breeds fast. One female can have up to 16 babies in a single litter, and she can become pregnant again the very next day. All it takes to make millions of mice is a little nice weather and abundant food. So it's no wonder that mice just love the wheat belt of Australia. In 1994, a single swarm of mice in South Australia caused over $65 million worth of destruction. No wonder Australians hate these Mises to pieces. Perhaps they could take a lesson from a small town in Germany that once found an unusual way to get rid of rampaging rodents.
You can pipe the rats away?
I can. I have a very special tune for rats.
Show me at once!
Very well.
According to legend, a Pied Piper once used music to rid a town of rodents. Unfortunately, after a pay dispute, he took all the children as well, in a story that could be more than just a fairy tale. Historical records from the German town of Hamelin suggest that on June 26, 1284, a young piper really did appear in town. Some speculate that the piper was hired to find settlers for new colonies in Eastern Europe. Or perhaps he was recruiting for a crusade or a battle. Whatever the reason, over 130 of Hamelin's young people left town that day, never to be seen again. He left behind only a blind child and a lame teenager. Today, Hamelin has a full-time Pied Piper and still has a street named after the sad event. A modern-day Pied Piper could make a fortune in Australia getting rid of swarms of mice. Unlike the next contender in the countdown, which is so popular, it can attract swarms of humans.
Number 9.
All kinds of games are played on the beaches of California, including the game of love. While some come to soak up the sun and seek out a mate, these beaches are also home to number 9 in the countdown. for at night, these beaches attract a different crowd. These people are here to see an orgy, but it's all in the name of science. They're led by Professor of Biology at Pepperdine University, Karen Martin.
Oh, look over there. Did you see that one?
Where are you pointing?
It came up with a wave and just went skittering back down. So that's the first one. That was one of the scouts.
So should we go up and look, or?
Well, let's just let them get started because we don't want to scare them away. Yeah.
These people are here to see a small fish called a grunion.
If anybody was coming to Southern California, I would hope that they would come at a time when there's a grunion run. It's something you can see nowhere else in the world. It's like no other fish in the world. It's an incredible sight to see an animal that's fully aquatic be fully out of the water, doing something that's vital to the survival of the species.
The grunion is number 9 in the countdown because hundreds of thousands of these incredible fish come ashore to mate. First, the females come ashore, digging in to lay their eggs. Then it's the male's turn as they fertilize the eggs in the sand. Here, the eggs can develop far from the mouths of hungry predators until they hatch 2 weeks later when the next high tide washes over them.
I never have any shortage of people coming out to watch grunion with me. People love to come and watch the grunion under the full moon. People hold hands and walk up and down the beach. It's very romantic.
But a different swarm looks for romance on the beaches of Florida. Just like grunions, young people from across America are drawn to these beaches in the spring.
Spring break in Fort Lauderdale. 250,000 kids here for the sole purpose of partying.
But this party got out of control. In 1985, a huge mob of beer-befuddled, hormone-crazed undergrads trashed the town. That's why today, city officials try to attract a different crowd. In Fort Lauderdale, spring break now means job fairs and careers rather than beers. But the fun in the sun hasn't stopped. The party's just shifted on to other beaches in Florida. But not even the most hormonally charged undergrad can compete with the grunion. One female can lay more than 3,000 eggs on her trip to the beach, and she can spawn up to 6 times each season. No wonder crowds flock to see a fish that really digs beaches.
Yeah, you can just see the shine in the sun.
It seems that for graduates and grunions, making out on the beach is a spring rite that will never be wrong.
We've swarmed all over the first 2 contenders. But coming up are fishy tales that show when you mess with the mob, even Santa has to get out of town. That's next on Animal Planet's The Most Extreme. Number 8.
The next contender in our countdown of super swarms seeks safety in numbers. Running in at number 8 is the caribou. In the frozen wastes of the Arctic, these large deer stick together in large numbers for a very good reason. natives know all too well that caribou in a herd are hard to hunt. There are always hundreds of eyes on the lookout. So it's no wonder that caribou swarm all over the countryside. In Alaska, there are twice as many caribou as people, and it's estimated that the largest herds contain over 500,000 deer. And this is a mob on the move. There are so many hungry mouths in the herd that some caribou can travel 3,000 miles each year in search of new grazing grounds. But that's nothing compared to the most famous caribou in the world. On Christmas Eve, Santa uses domesticated caribou to deliver his presents. And these reindeer can really move. Donner and Blitzen and Company must be very special reindeer because in one night, Santa's sleigh has to visit around 667 million children. It's been calculated that if there's an average of 3.7 children per household, Santa's reindeer would have to visit about 1,300 houses every second. They'd have to travel about 111 million miles, giving them an average speed of 3.6 million miles an hour. Wild caribou may not move quite so fast, but they can cover impressive distances. The 700,000-strong George River herd covers almost 200,000 square miles in their annual migratory cycle. At least these caribou don't have to rely on Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer as a navigator. With 500,000 caribou traveling in the same direction, the only place you can get lost is in the crowd.
So far, we've seen crowds of caribou, gallons of grunions, and rascally rodents. But coming up is a close encounter with a 10-legged terror. That's next on Animal Planet's The Most Extreme. Number 7.
In an increasingly crowded world, it can be hard to find a place to get away from it all. So that's why number 7 in our countdown of super swarms has taken privacy to the extreme. This contender has gone to ground, deep underground. Caves are perfect real estate, so long as you can see in the dark. But that's no problem for the animal that's squeaking in to number 7 in the countdown. The bat. The Bracken Caves in central Texas shelter the world's largest bat colony. 20 million Mexican free-tailed bats swarm all over the ceiling. But there are some problems with living in such an extreme crowd. Just trying to find your baby would be enough to make any mother a little batty. The other problem with living in a cave is the lack of sanitation. So when bats go up, stuff comes down. This is a pile of bat droppings. It's as tall as the Statue of Liberty, some 300 feet high. It becomes a mountainous meal for swarms of cockroaches. and humans wanting a close encounter of the turd kind. In autumn, the bats leave the Bracken Caves for Mexico, and the cleaners move in. Huge vacuum pumps suck the bat droppings to the surface, where it's bagged and sold as garden fertilizer. But there are other crowds that also make a big mess. In 1969, one of the biggest parties in the world began in Bethel, New York. It was called Woodstock. Organizers expected a crowd of 50,000. They got 500,000. In this spaced-out swarm, people didn't sleep, didn't wash, and the toilet facilities were just like those of the bats in Bracken Caves.
What are you guys digging the hole for?
Organic waste.
So this is your sanitation remedy right here?
Yeah, aluminum goes out, plastic goes out, organic waste goes back into the earth.
What about human waste?
There's a lot of hills around here.
Today, thanks to modern sanitation, most of us don't have to worry about where our waste goes. But it's still a big problem. It's estimated that if you collected all the human excrement produced in one day and put it in the enormous Louisiana Superdome in New Orleans, it would fill it to the height of a 4-story building. The collected droppings of 20 million bats also creates a staggering stench, which might explain why every night this crowd likes to get out for a breath of fresh air. This is one swarm that values its privacy, unlike our next contender, a home invader that really gets under your feet.
Number 6.
Tropical islands are some of the least crowded places on the planet. Unless you're on Christmas Island in the Indian Ocean, home of number 6 in the countdown. The red crab. These crustaceans are all over the island like a rash. Some 500 people share Christmas Island with about 120 million red crabs. Fortunately, for most of the year, the crabs live inside the forest. But once a year, at the first sign of the wet season, the entire adult crab population marches to the sea. It's an epic 5-mile journey out of the rainforest, through villages, across busy roads, and down cliffs to the beach. The crabs that survive the week-long trip dip themselves in the water to replenish their body fluids, and then it's time to mate. The red crab is number 6 in the countdown because an estimated 60 million sex-crazed crustaceans swarm across the beach. Then each female releases over 100,000 eggs into the water. But crabs aren't the only ones living in extremely crowded real estate. In England, the city of London is home to over 7 million people. This may seem crowded, but if the area of the city was divided into tennis courts, there would be one person per court. But if you travel to Hong Kong, the living conditions are really crowded. While the population is similar to London, the amount of available land is so small that each tennis court would have to hold 25 people. Does the thought of living in such a crowded city scare you? Perhaps when you're in a huge swarm of people, you find your heart beating much faster than usual. You start to sweat, and your throat becomes dry. These are the classic symptoms of a person with demophobia, the morbid fear of crowds. Red crabs certainly don't suffer from demophobia. Even their babies stick together when they return to shore after a month at sea. Then they start their own march up into the forest as part of a swarm so special that it forms its own living red carpet.
Living in a swarm this big would be enough to make anyone a little crabby. But just wait till you see the crowds that gather to watch the human race and plunge into a world where synchronized swimming is a matter of life and death. That's next on Animal Planet's The Most Extreme. Number 5.
The story of the next contender in our countdown of extreme swarms begins millions of years ago in the islands of Palau, south of Japan. When a submerged reef rose from the sea, it created the landlocked saltwater lakes that became home for the most unusual swarms in the countdown. Welcome to Jellyfish Lake. Each day, millions of jellyfish drift slowly from one side of the lake to the other. Safe inside their private pool, these extreme jellies have become vegetarian. They feed thanks to millions of microscopic algae growing inside their bodies. The algae collect sunlight and photosynthesize, creating an excess of sugars and proteins which feed the jellyfish. In return, they form a swarm of synchronized sun worshippers. Every day, the jellyfish mass together to swim from one side of the lake to the other, keeping out of the shadows. However, jellyfish aren't the only animals to have a mob mentality. We'd like to think of ourselves as individuals, but there's some evidence that when you put humans in a mob, a different psychology takes over. We've all seen flocks of birds and schools of fish moving as one. But next time you're in a crowd, watch how humans also move in synchrony. One study has shown that crowds of people can move, jump, and clap with extraordinary precision. Slow motion analysis has revealed that the hand clapping of one crowd was accurate to less than 1/64th of a second. Such is the power of mob psychology. The synchronized behavior of the jellyfish is spectacularly impressive, given that these simple animals don't even have a brain. But then it doesn't take much thought to form a swarm. Jellyfish are mostly drifters, congregating thanks to the power of wind and current. But our next contender has to survive an endurance ordeal that would cripple any Olympic athlete.
Number 4.
The fourth contender in the countdown of extreme swarms hangs out in the mountains of central Mexico. This is no ordinary forest. And these are no ordinary trees. Instead of leaves, they have butterflies. Lots of butterflies. There can be 20,000 on a branch, and 220 million in a swarm. And that's why number 4 in the countdown is the monarch butterfly. This swarm has assembled in Mexico to escape the cold northern winter. But the butterflies can't stay here because they need to lay their eggs on a plant called milkweed, which only grows up north. So come spring, it's time for millions of monarchs to move. The monarch butterfly may look fragile, but it's no lightweight. Entomologists have tagged individual butterflies and found that they can travel at average speeds of up to 80 miles an hour and fly higher than 3,000 feet. This is how, over 5 generations, monarchs can fly as far north as Canada. But then in autumn, it's once again time to head south for the winter. Monarch butterflies really are the ultimate endurance athletes. Some individual butterflies can travel up to 3,000 miles. That works out to be a journey of about 150 million body lengths. If we tried running the equivalent distance, we'd have to travel around the Earth 11 times. Not even the world's best runners can match the monarch butterfly's extreme endurance. But that doesn't stop another swarm from trying. Each year, New York City hosts one of the biggest races in the world. 30,000 runners compete in the New York Marathon. The logistics of coordinating so many people are extreme. Organizers have to find 70,000 snack bars, 100,000 bottles of water, and 2 million paper cups. They print 46,000 t-shirts and use over 130,000 safety pins. There are 1,700 medical personnel, 12,000 volunteers, and a swarm of 2 million spectators. Millions of monarchs may give human athletes a run for their money, but they're no match for the billions of bugs coming up in the countdown.
So far, we've seen a sky of butterflies and a sea of jellyfish. But if you thought a swarm of crazy crabs was bad, coming up is a plague of truly biblical proportions. That's next on Animal Planet's The Most Extreme. Number 3.
We may be witnessing the beginning of an era that will mean the complete annihilation of man.
Annihilation?
The beginning of the end.
Beginning the end of our countdown of extreme swarms is an animal that has truly terrifying powers of destruction. Hopping in to number 3 in the countdown is the locust. Movie directors didn't need to enlarge locusts to turn them into a destructive force. For what these grasshoppers lack in size, they make up with sheer weight of numbers. The locust is number 3 in the countdown because a single swarm can contain 40 billion insects. These vast hordes threaten over 20% of the Earth's surface. More than 65 countries are at risk of invasion from an army that really marches on its stomach. A single swarm can eat 80,000 tons of crops a day, literally stripping the countryside bare. But some countries have been invaded by other destructive swarms. Back in the 13th century, one writer in a doomed city compared the approaching army to a swarm of locusts. It was the Mongol horde of Genghis Khan. His name meant universal ruler, and he went on to create the largest continuous land empire in history. He began by uniting the tribes of Mongolia. Then he swarmed across the continent. With each town he captured, his army grew until it was 250,000 strong. At its height, the Mongol Empire stretched from Hungary to Korea and from Siberia to Tibet. Imagine the size of the empire if Genghis Khan could have traveled like a locust. For when these grasshoppers grow up, they get wings. Locusts can fly for 17 hours without stopping, traveling up to 3,000 miles to find food. But even this plague would be completely overwhelmed by the next contender in the countdown.
Number 2.
The cold, stormy seas around Antarctica cover almost 8 million square miles. It's a huge home for a huge swarm of tiny creatures. Coming in at number 2 in the countdown are krill. These miniature shrimps thrive on microscopic plants blooming in the nutrient-rich waters of the Southern Ocean. They never get any bigger than your little finger, but if they stay out of trouble, they can live for up to 7 years. And the best way to keep out of trouble is to stick together in a swarm. Swarms of krill are big, very big. One swarm was estimated to cover more than 173 square miles and was thought to contain 2 million tons of krill. That's about the same weight as the entire human population of Canada. Unfortunately for krill, they have another name. They're sometimes called red whale feed because a whale can eat an African elephant-sized portion of krill each day. But back on dry land, there's another population that's rapidly forming a swarm of krill-like proportions. There was a time when the human population grew only slowly. Birth rates and death rates were about the same, keeping the population stable. But recently, things have changed, and the human swarm started growing fast. To see just how quickly the human population has exploded, you need to journey back in time. For thousands of years, humans were having lots of children, but losing many of them before they turned 5. So, by the year 1500, there were probably about 460 million people on the planet. Then, along came the Industrial Revolution and the advancement of science and technology. The death rate started falling, and our population started growing. Our swarm has already become 12 times bigger than at the year 1500, and is predicted that by the turn of the next century, we'll be a swarm 11 billion strong. While it looks like humans are taking over the Earth, at least the sea belongs to the krill. It's been estimated that there are 100,000 krill for every single human on the planet. But even this enormous gathering is no match for the most extreme swarm in the countdown.
We've seen the 9 contenders. They're the best of the best. Only one animal is a more extreme swarming machine. It's number 1, and it's coming up next on Animal Planet's The Most Extreme. Number 1.
Be warned. The most extreme swarm in the countdown is a lot closer than you think. A horde of billions have conquered Europe, but it could already be too late to stop the Empire from invading your home.
A fear-frenzied moment of suspense as mankind totters before a thing that multiplies faster than it can be killed. Where human courage challenges the brute force, the slicing jaws, the poison fangs that guard the subterranean nest where the beast spawns its terrible progeny.
Them are here. Them are ants. This extreme swarm may not be the radioactive monsters of science fiction, but there really is an ant that's taking over the world. Fighting its way into number 1 in the countdown is the Argentine ant. These tiny terrors are becoming the most common household pest in the world. They can't sting, but they can bite. Their simple battle plan is to keep attacking until they overwhelm the opposition. But the ants also have a secret weapon. Unlike other ants, colonies don't compete with each other. They cooperate. By working together, they're forming a super swarm to conquer the world. Early last century, the first wave of invaders left their home in Argentina by stowing away on ships bound for Europe. The army of ants wiped out native species as they advanced. Now, there are billions of Argentine ants in millions of nests, and they're all genetically related. That's why these ants are #1 in the countdown. Their empire stretches 3,700 miles, all the way from Italy to Spain. It's the biggest super colony in history. The closest thing to a human super colony occurs once every 144 years in India. The Mahakumbh Mela is the most sacred of all Hindu pilgrimages. That's why in 2001, an estimated 70 million people visited Allahabad on the Ganges River during the 6-week festival. It was a time to cleanse the soul and wash away sins in the purifying waters of the river. This could be the largest human gathering in history and could be seen from a satellite orbiting 400 miles above the Earth. At the end of the festival, the worshippers return to their homes, but the invasion of the Argentine ants will never end. This swarm is sweeping the globe, even to remote islands in the Pacific. They've even managed to invade a school playground in Auckland, New Zealand, home of professional entomologist Ruud Kleinpast.
The thing that makes these Argentine ants so extreme is the fact that they all recognize each other. They're so closely related. If I were to take this ant on an aeroplane with me and drop it off in a playground somewhere in France, let's say, chances are that the French ants would say, "Bonjour, sister. Nice to see you. Welcome to France. Why don't you join our big, great European swarm?" Goes to show, eh? These ants that cooperate with each other have got other things to worry about. They don't need to fight each other. They can concentrate on other things, such as how to take over the world.
Perhaps we could learn a lesson from these tiny invaders. Imagine how much nicer the world would be if the human swarm started to cooperate like the Argentine ant. For when it comes to swarming, there can be no doubt that the Argentine ant really is the most extreme.